my last class with you all. I've enjoyed teaching this trimester. My schedule said Josh was going to be out tonight, so I was feeling a little pressure when I saw him in here. That's a joke, Josh. And on Wednesday, for those that join us, we will be looking at chapter 24 of Luke, 1 through 53. So if you want to read that beforehand. Today we're going to be talking about the crucifixion. Let's start with a prayer and then we'll get started. Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for your Son and for the life that we have through him. Help us to live lives that glorify you in the things that we do, and the things that we think about. And thank you so much for all the blessings that you give us and for this family here. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so we're going to be in chapter 23, starting in verse 26 today. Let's start by reading this first little section. And as they led him away, they seized one Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, and laid on him the cross to carry it behind Jesus. And there followed him a great multitude of people and of women who were mourning and lamenting for him. But turning to them, Jesus said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming when they will say, 'Blessed are the barren and the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed.' Then they will begin to say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and to the hills, 'Cover us.' For if they do these things when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry?" I think I'm on the wrong page here. I was trying to start on page 2. Okay. We're going to come back to Simon in just a second. I want to start with the daughters of Jerusalem. So, I've said he's going to be alone on the cross, and I actually sort of felt like when I got to this section, I was like, well, he's not completely alone. There's these women that are following behind him and weeping and lamenting. But it's interesting what he says is, "Don't weep for me. Weep for your children. Weep for the time when people will say, 'Blessed are the barren wombs, those that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed.' That they'll begin to say to the mountains, 'Fall on us.'" As we think about this book that we've studied, I want to just make sure that we keep it in context of what's actually going on. I thought it was very interesting studying for this particular class because a lot of commentators, a lot of writers will shift, maybe without even realizing. I even listened to a couple of sermons where they'll talk about, well, he's talking about Jerusalem, and there's these terrible things coming on Jerusalem, and then they immediately flip to, and this is about the eternal judgment at the last day. And then you're going to go and you're going to have to answer to God. So I want to just urge us this morning, let's just keep it in context. I'm not making any statements about other passages. I'm talking about what we're studying in Luke. So let's just look real quick just to remind everyone. Luke 13. In 34 and 35, Jesus says, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often would I have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, but you were not willing. Behold, your house is forsaken. And I tell you, you will not see me until you say, 'Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.'" Look at chapter 19, starting in verse 41. "And when he drew near and saw the city, he wept over it, saying, 'Would that you, even you, had known on this day the things that make for peace. But now they are hidden from your eyes. For the days will come upon you when your enemies will set up a barricade around you and surround you and hem you in on every side and tear you down to the ground, you and your children within you, and they will not leave one stone upon another in you, because you did not know the time of your visitation. Chapter 21, starting in verse 20. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation has come near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let those who are inside the city depart, and let not those who are in the country enter it. For these are days of vengeance to fulfill all that is written. Alas, for women who are pregnant and for those who are nursing infants in those days, for there will be great distress upon the earth and wrath against the people. They will fall by the edge of the sword and be led captive among the nation, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. These women that are following him are weeping for him, and he is responding to that and saying, hey, this injustice that's being done to me is going to have less impact on you than what you've got coming. That's not really true. Obviously, the death of Jesus and his resurrection is the reason we're all here today. So, in the context of the bigger picture, there's really nothing that, we've all dedicated our lives to this very thing. He's been crucified and he's been raised from the dead. But Jesus says, do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves. So in the context of what he's doing, he's telling them, you need to be weeping for yourselves and for your children. Why does he say for your children? What year are we about? About?
In the 30s.
Okay, 30, 32, something. When will these women's children be grown men, raising families, doing things? When will these children be of the age where they will be dealing with very significant events in their life? Around 70. In 64, I think, there's going to be a big fire in Jerusalem, and it's going to get blamed on the Christians. And that starts an unraveling where Christians are persecuted in ways that we've really never seen since. So when he says, don't weep for me, he can see what these women and their children are going to have to deal with. He can see it. That's why when I read those passages, when he comes into the city, he weeps for the city. He doesn't weep for himself. He doesn't play the, I feel sorry for myself. He weeps for the city. Oh, I long to gather you together. He weeps for the city. Oh, I wish it could be different. I wish there could be peace, but you're going to be pinned in from every side. And then he has the plea in 21 that we read where he says, when you see those armies surrounding Jerusalem, get out of the city. Flee to the mountains. Do not stay in the city. Because what would a good Jew do? If a good Jew saw people coming to surround the city, where would they go? To the temple. What's going to happen to the temple?
Destroyed.
Not one stone is literally going to be left upon another. So think about the people that rejected Jesus completely. When the army surrounded him, they said, I'm going to the temple. I'm going to pray. I'm going to rely on God to get me through this. But they didn't get what they were looking for. Okay, Simon the Cyrene. I want to focus a little bit today. This is a little bit like last Sunday. I said, I've got this passage that everyone in here has read like 1,000 times. Like, what can I show you here that you don't already know? You probably could quote it for me. But I like the interactions, and I want to focus a little bit on that today. So, Simon of Cyrene. Anybody know anything about him? Is this one of Jesus' friends?
Random person.
Seems to be a random person. Simon the Cyrene came in. Hey, we need you to carry this cross. He's having trouble carrying it. You need to carry it. One thing that's interesting about Simon of Cyrene, there's a lot of speculation that he became a believer. I couldn't find anything ironclad to give you, so I was just like, well, I don't know, maybe he did become a believer. But if you look in the Mark account in chapter 15, Mark says the father of Alexander and Rufus. Which I just thought was interesting because why would he reference the father of Alexander and Rufus? It's his kids, right? And were these written, like, were these books written in 33? Who knows when about all the Gospels were written? Somewhere, we don't know exactly, but...
Mark was first.
Okay. Any guess on years? I don't know the years, so you can say whatever you want right now. I'm just saying. Any guess on? I'm talking about approximations, about years.
Between 50 and 60.
Okay, between the 50s and the 60s? Yeah, I think that's about right. So when Mark says the father of Alexander and Rufus, he's writing to an audience. I think Mark is saying Alexander. It doesn't say Alexander Smith and Rufus. He doesn't give any connotation besides the father of Alexander and Rufus. Somebody must have known Alexander and Rufus. Somebody knew Alexander and Rufus, and he was just saying, oh, Simon Cyrene, this is long ago. This is the father of Alexander and Rufus. I tell you this because let's think back to what Luke said he was going to do for us. All the way back when we started. Does anybody remember in the first class, what did Luke say he was going to provide for us?
Orderly account.
An orderly account using eyewitness testimony, right? And one of the things that's very compelling as you go through, not just Luke, I've done this with Mark too, the level of detail that is given about certain things and things that actually can be cross-checked, just random little tidbits, just proves history and time that things took place, that things were actually happening. Okay, so Simon, I lost my Simon spot here.
While we don't know what happened to Simon, my thought has always wondered, here's a man carrying Jesus' cross. How could he do that and not be affected some way or another? Just a thought.
Well, and that actually kind of goes along the lines when I say the interactions with Jesus today. One of the things about carrying the cross, the posts, most historians say the posts were in the ground, like permanently, the vertical post. So you had the cross beam that they would hang them from. And so, Jesus has been severely beaten. Luke doesn't give us as much detail on that as some other accounts do, but he's having trouble carrying it. They get Simon to carry it, help carry the crossbeam as he kind of goes up. One of the things about the women too that I wanted to mention, I mentioned this probably 6 weeks ago, but Luke is the gospel of highlighting women. It's very clear cut, which would have gotten you not a lot of credibility in the first century because women were not held in any esteem at all. So the fact that all this eyewitness testimony uses women, today it's relevant to us. At the time, it was strange. It was strange to say, hey, this demon-possessed woman came and fell at Jesus' feet. This prostitute was here. These women are the ones that find him at the tomb. In fact, there was, I think I quoted it in one of the classes, Celsus, who I think was maybe like the 2nd century, he even said, which he said some kind of humorous things about women in his little quote, but he said, it's ridiculous that you would use women as your way of trying to prove that someone existed. And then he goes on to say something about how all women are hysterical, which is just kind of funny to read it. But he doesn't value women. He's not from the same kind of viewpoint as we are today. But just think about how the book opens. We get the most detail on Mary, on Elizabeth. We get Anna in the temple. We get the woman who's been bleeding for her entire life, touching him of his garment. We get the whole story of the prostitute at his feet. And then, you get to this story here, and I've said for weeks, nobody's going to be there for him. But I'm a little bit incorrect. Because in the background are this crowd of women. And they are following, and they are weeping, and he's saying, don't weep for me. Weep for your children. Because they've got some terrible things coming. It kind of reminded me, I don't know why, I mean, we could have used maybe like a movie on Jesus, but for some reason it reminded me of the scene in Braveheart where William Wallace is getting executed, and the people are in the crowd, and you see them, and they've got their cloaks on, and they're not making a stir at all. But he's got the people that believed in his mission in the crowd, and they're praying, and they're weeping. While they're sitting there, they're just being quiet, while the rest of the crowd is super rowdy around them. It reminds me of that picture. It says they stood off at a distance.
Brad,
Yes, sir.
I can't help but think of Lot's wife. She was leaving the city. You don't know what she was thinking. You don't know why she looked back. But she may have been thinking about her children.
Yeah, she might have.
Brad, I was thinking too about the Passion of the Christ, that movie a long time ago. And it had that scene, and of course it's just, kind of parts of it are fictional. But it had the scene where Jesus is carrying the crossbeam and he falls. And Mary, try not to cry, Mary imagines him as a little boy falling down. And she rushes to him and picks him up. And it always makes me think of Caleb, my son, and him carrying that, and I can't help him, and how God must feel.
You're going to make me cry.
I'll change it, the cry moment a little bit. Talking about the women, Matthew mentions 5 women in Jesus' genealogy by name, which is kind of like unheard of in a Jewish recitation of genealogy. But Paul does the same thing in Romans 16 when he gives all the greetings to the Roman Christians, and he mentions 7 women by name, but one of them, who he says is a mother to Rufus. So he mentions Rufus, who is chosen by the Lord. He uses those words, Rufus, who is chosen by the Lord, which sure makes it sound like that's the guy carrying his cross.
Yeah, I had not made that
And
connection.
said, and his mother, who is also a mother to me. So Paul had some close connection with
That's an interesting
someone
connection.
named Rufus. And they say Rufus was not a super common name. So.
That's great. Okay, so, and when we're not going to be able to get into it, I'm already behind the 8 ball here, but Hosea 10:8, this, they say to the mountains, fall on us. This is a quote, from the Old Testament. And that is where a lot of these, like, you listen to a sermon, you read a commentary, they just immediately switch gears without even saying they did. It's like, we're talking about Jerusalem being destroyed, we're talking about Jesus leaving over Jerusalem, and the next thing's like, and now you better get your life together because God's going to judge you one day. I just think we need to keep it in context. Okay, so let me just make sure I've got this. Okay, so we covered the interaction with the women, the interaction with Simon. Let's move on the reading here. What's going on with this? I'm like, it hasn't been like that the whole time, right?
Sleep or something.
Pretty pictures.
Okay. 32 through 38. Actually, I think I'm going to do 32 through 43. 2 others, who were criminals, were led away to be put to death with him. When they came to the place that is called the Skull, there they crucified him, and the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. And Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And they cast lots to divide his garments, and the people stood by watching. But the ruler scoffed at him, saying, He saved others. Let him save himself, if he is the Christ of God, his chosen one. The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine and saying, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was also an inscription over him, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who were hanged railed at him, saying, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we are receiving the due reward of our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong." And he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And he said to him, "Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." So, a few classes ago, Josh covered Jesus as the Lamb. Last week I covered Jesus as the high priest. And here we are, we've got Jesus as the king. And it's not the king that you were hoping for in terms of the optics. We get a sign above his head, says this is the King of the Jews, which was a mockery of him. It was not meant to be a serious thing. It was like a sarcastic comment from Pilate. We get his cupbearer bringing him sour wine to drink. Doesn't want it. We get, not in Luke's account, but we get them questioning him and then put a purple robe on him, put a crown of thorns smashed down on his head, bring him out to the people. This is your king, right? And that's when they get so mad that they say crucify him. We're seeing this picture of the king. And they're trying to morph him into the earthly king that the people expected. He is on a completely different wavelength. Okay, so the interaction with the criminals. Well, first let's do the crowd. So the crowd says, you know, he saved others, save yourself. We've got this angry mob that's there, and they continue to hurl insults at him, and he never really addresses anything they say. Whatever they've said, he just sort of moves on. He never addresses it. We get this one criminal. And, you know, this just hit me for the first time this week, but, you know, he screams out, "Hey, if you're the Christ, save yourself and us." So this guy's at his last moments of life, and he's probably heard about Jesus, and he's like, "Hey man, save yourself, but save me. I need to get off this cross. I need to be done with this." You know, it sort of reminds me of the discussion we had about prayer last Sunday. You know, I was saying that a lot of times I think we struggle with making prayer be very transactional. God, I either need a blessing or I need an escape from a crisis. So if you could provide one of those two things, that'd be great. I either need something or I need out of a jam. You know, this time of year, I think about George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life. He goes into Martini's bar when everything's sort of unraveling, and he says, "Dear Father in heaven, I'm not a praying man, but if you're up there and you can hear me, show me the way. I'm at the end of my rope. Show me the way." So he's at this bar. Does anybody remember what happens next?
He gets busted in the mouth.
He gets busted in the mouth, and then he says, "That's what I get for
That's what
praying."
I get for believing in.
That's what I get for praying.
We did watch that movie as Jordan for 20 years, every Christmas Eve.
I love that movie. I have a sign of it in my closet. I love it. It's wonderful. This guy's request reminds me of that. It's just sort of a like last ditch, like, "Hey man, if you're the Christ, like it says King of the Jews on your thing, if you could just save us, we'd appreciate you. Go ahead and do that, because I'm trying to get down from this cross." And then he gets rebuked by this other criminal. And in verse 40, the other rebuked him, saying, Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation, and we indeed justly? For we are receiving the due reward of our deeds, but this man has done nothing wrong. And he says, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And he said to him, truly I say to you, today you'll be with me in paradise. They both asked to be saved. The criminal that didn't believe in him just kind of threw out a last ditch, like, hey, can you save me? The other criminal is on the cross knowing they're both getting ready to die. There wasn't any question mark. He wasn't thinking in his head, you know, that song 10,000 Angels is getting ready to come true for me. He wasn't thinking he's going to somehow overcome the cross right here. He was thinking, we're both going to die. And he says, remember me. I think it's amazing that this other criminal sees a future with Jesus. Right? I mean, he sees something in Jesus that tells him there's a future here. It's an amazing statement of faith.
Brad, it's also following the same pattern we've been seeing over and over in Luke, in that this criminal admitted his fault, whereas we don't see the other criminal doing that. Just like when the Pharisees couldn't see their own faults, but all the people who came to Jesus in humility and knowing that their need of him were saved by him or
Yeah.
invested in by him.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
The first criminal, the unbelieving one, sounds a lot like the whole mentality of, hey, this is the last chance to do what we expect the Christ to do. Save yourself and us in the process and do everything that we expect the Christ to do. And the other guy completely got it right, as far as the true nature of the kingdom.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, we also see from Matthew points out that the robbers who were crucified with him also reviled him in the same way. So we see that while he was on the cross, this one came to change his mind about who Jesus was.
Yeah.
Because he first was reviling him along with the other one and then ended up rebuking
That's
the other criminal.
Okay, so great comments. The other thing, so, and I'll try to kind of summarize this if we have time, but these interactions that Jesus has, we're still showcasing his compassion while he's dying on the cross. Luke does not focus on the torture. One of the reasons that movie, The Passion, I think hit me so hard when I watched it was because the Gospels don't belabor, but they mention it, they say it. I'm not saying it's not there. But the whole thing is not about, look at what they did to him over and over again. Instead, Luke chooses to focus on his interactions with these people and the response. Sometimes it's not him talking, just the response that people had to him while he's on the cross. The response that it gives to people as they see him there. And he says, while they're crucifying him, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. We don't have time to even try to unpack this. But I will tell you, if you ever find yourself saying, I'll forgive, but I won't forget, I don't think that that is a Christ-like attitude towards forgiveness. I'm not saying it's easy to forget. It's not. In fact, I was trying to think today, I even put a little quote over here. I was like, I'm trying to live a life where I anticipate being easy to forgive people, that I'm willing to do it. And you know what I realized as I was going through the exercise in my head? I require acknowledgement. You ever think about that? Who requires acknowledgement here? Hey, look, I won't beat you up over it. If you'll just say, hey, I'm sorry about the way no, it's fine. You're good, I forgive you. That's not what happened here. Jesus is being wronged. They're angry. There's a mob. They've been torturing him, and he just says, forgive them. I'm not saying we can do it, but that's the standard. The standard is that, and the thing is, in Hebrews 10, which I also don't have time to go to, it talks about Christ's sacrifice once and for all, and then it quotes from Jeremiah. And what does God say? He says, I'm going to write my laws on their hearts, and I'm going to remember their sins no more. We are not people that have to run around worried about what our position is with our Father. He has told us plainly, I forgive you. Look at the Son. I forgive you.
Brad,
Yes. Okay.
Jesus' forgiveness is there all the time. He expects us to have that forgiving heart. Forgiveness in our heart is there before someone even asks for forgiveness.
Yeah.
Just like him.
Hard to do.
It is. It is.
Okay, got 5 minutes. Let's read this. It was now about the 6th hour. There was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour, while the sun's light failed. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Then Jesus, calling out with a loud voice, said, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And having said this, he breathed his last. Now when the centurion saw what had taken place, he praised God, saying, certainly this man was innocent. And all the crowds that had assembled for this spectacle, when they saw what had taken place, returned home, beating their breasts. And all his acquaintances and the women who had followed him from Galilee stood at a distance watching these things. Now there was a man named Joseph, from the Jewish town of Arimathea. He was a member of the council, a good and righteous man who had not consented to their decision and action. And he was looking for the kingdom of God. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then he took it down and wrapped it in a linen shroud and laid it in a tomb cut in stone, where no one had ever been been laid. It was the day of preparation, and the Sabbath was beginning. The women who had come with him from Galilee followed and saw the tomb and how his body was laid. Then they returned and prepared spices and ointments. On the Sabbath they rested according to the commandment. I want to just point out that in this super dark text where we see our Lord crucified, that there are many redeeming things going on through this crucifixion. The criminal with faith we just talked about, the sun stops shining. Veil is torn in two from top to bottom, proving that Jesus came to fulfill what he said he was going to fulfill. His amazing calm demeanor, not something we talk about a lot. Joseph of Arimathea, this guy was a member of the council, but he was a believer. He goes to Pilate, he takes the body. The centurion, this is a Greek. The centurion sees him. Surely this man was innocent. When Jesus was raised from the dead, there was lots of drama about what happened to the body. We don't talk about it a lot. A lot of it's in the history that's written around the time of Jesus' death. They thought the disciples had stolen the body. They had all sorts of theories. And so I think it's very interesting that when Luke gives this account, he says a couple of things that are evidences for us. One, Joseph of Arimathea takes it to a brand new tomb that no one had yet been laid. So no one could say, maybe you grabbed the wrong body. There was 12 bodies in that tomb. No, these tombs had shelves in them. They would wrap the body with spices in the tomb. They laid in there. They didn't bury the way that we do, where we go, we're done in 3 days and it's like, that's it. They waited for the body to be decomposed. They took the bones, they put them in a box. They put that box back in the tomb. It was a process. It says that the women went with Joseph, saw where the tomb was. There's no question about, did the women know where Jesus was actually at? Did they go to the wrong tomb and find it empty? No. They went with Joseph. They saw it. They saw where it was. They honored the Sabbath, but then they came back and did the spices around the body. What else did I have here? Luke does not focus on the physical aspects of the crucifixion. His account focuses on the rejection of Jesus. Rejection from the rulers, rejection from the Roman soldiers, from Pilate's sarcastic sign, one of the criminals, versus those that support him, the crowd of women, the other criminal, the centurion. And his recorded words focus not on his agony, but on his compassion for others. I don't think he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? I wish we could have at least touched on Psalm 22, the righteous servant. I do want to end with actually the song that Travis led this morning, When I Survey the Wondrous Cross by Isaac Watts, 1707. I think this song, and the versions that we sing always have this one verse missing that I think is pretty good. I think this song, this hymn, really captures the compassion of Jesus, but also our personal response to what we see in Jesus. When I survey the wondrous cross on which the Prince of Glory died, my richest gain I count but loss, and pour contempt on all my pride. Forbid it, Lord, that I should boast, save in the death of Christ my Lord. All the vain things that charm me most, I sacrifice them to his blood. See from his head, his hands, his feet, sorrow and love flow mingled down. Did e'er such love and sorrow meet, or thorns compose so rich a crown? His dying crimson, like a robe, spreads o'er his body on the tree. Then I am dead to all the globe, and all the globe is dead to me. Were the whole realm of nature mine, that were at present far too small. Love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, my all. It's a great hymn. Okay, it's 10:31. Nope, it's not. It's 10:29. Okay, anyone have any final comments? We're going to be looking at chapter 24 on Wednesday. Okay, we're dismissed.